Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on continuing education for administrators. I'm going to switch a couple of things around here and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right. Good morning, everyone. Today's webinar is going to cover continuing education for administrators. So if you have taken a look at our upcoming webinars, you'll see that we have another webinar scheduled for next week for continuing education for members and users. So this is going to cover the administrative side of continuing education, and the member and user side will be covered in next week's webinar. So we'll go over the details for that in a moment. First, just a little bit of housekeeping. So all of your microphones and phones are muted, and all of your questions for today's topic should be entered into the chat window. Devin, our teammate here, is answering all of your questions in our chat, so you don't need to wait until the end of the presentation in order to get those answers. And a recording of this webinar and all of our webinars is available on our YouTube channel. So wait a few days. If you can't stay for the entire webinar, you can catch a recording of it. Make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we'll talk about that in a second. You can find plenty of tutorials on our YouTube channel. We talked about all of our upcoming webinars. So when you are taking a look at clubexpress.com/calendar, or you just navigate to the calendar feature when you're on the ClubExpress website, you can find a list of all of our upcoming webinars and register for them in advance, so you have them on your calendar and ready to go. So as I said, next week's webinar is going to cover continuing education for members and your users. So be sure that you tune into that so you can see the other side of the module. And as I mentioned, a recording of this webinar will be available on our YouTube channel. You can find our YouTube channel by searching for clubexpress.com in your browser. Make sure that you hit that subscribe button. That is going to ensure that you get notified as soon as we post a new tutorial or webinar on our channel. And last, if you are enjoying ClubExpress, we would love to hear from you. Please visit clubexpress.com/reviews and leave us a review to tell us what you like, what you don't like. We're more than happy to read your comments, and it always helps us make sure that our software is providing you with the service that you need. So visit clubexpress.com/review and leave us a review. So in today's webinar, we're going to cover continuing education. Continuing education is one of our extra cost features. It's used to allow organizations to offer certificate programs through their website. So this extra cost feature, as of this time, is $1,000. It's a one-time fee, and you have the module on your website for the life of your site. So make sure to check clubexpress.com pricing info for more up-to-date information on pricing for this module, as well as all of our other extra cost features. So the certificates that you're creating as administrators can be earned by members and optionally non-members through any means that you determine, whether that's attending a certain number of meetings, taking an assessment, attending a course that you might teach. You can also configure a list of pre-approved courses that users can take to earn those certificates. And we'll talk about how that works and ways that you can use that in our session today. Now, when you set up these programs, these certificate programs, you can configure any number of fees to go with them. That can include an application fee, fees for course materials, tests that you might give out, and more. Those fees can be different for members versus non-members, and you can even configure late fees if you provide these courses and certificates on a set schedule. Now, continuing education also connects to your event calendar. So when a user signs up for an event that you've configured to offer credit, they can clearly see that the event offers them credit. And when you mark them as having attended the event, the system automatically gives them credit for that event. So we'll talk about how you would set up that event that carries credit and how you make that connection. Users also have the ability to request credit for any number of other things that you allow them to request credit for, like attending another course, taking an assessment or a test, publishing an article, their work experience, their education. The options are limitless, and they're all up to you. And finally, you have the option to add printable certificates to each course that you create. So these certificates are designed individually for each course by you and a designer from our team. The certificates are an add-on to the continuing education module, but they are available. Now, as I mentioned, in today's webinar, we're only covering the administrative side of continuing education. So be sure to come back next week to see the user side. And if you want to make sure that you get it on your calendar, register for that webinar at clubexpress.com/calendar. And don't forget that when you register for webinars in advance, you have the option to submit questions that you'd like to see demonstrated in the webinar. So if after watching a webinar today, you have a few more questions, feel free to enter those into next week's webinar when you register, and we'll make sure to get those answered for you in our demonstration. So first up, we're going to dive into the module, and what we're going to set up initially are your certifications or the courses that you offer and your point system or credit system. So I'm going to navigate to our Northwest Chamber of Commerce. This is one of our demo sites we don't use very often, but it just demonstrates the functionality as it relates to a Chamber of Commerce. So this is a fake Chamber of Commerce that we're using today to demonstrate continuing education. I'm signed in as our favorite administrator, Martin Smith. So Martin Smith has access to our control panel, which is how we're going to access the administrative side of this module. When continuing education is enabled, you can find it in your organization's Club tab. Now, the Club tab here has been renamed to the Chamber tab as we're working in our demo chamber today. Remember that the Club tab for you might be named something different based on what your organization has chosen. So it might be named to association, society, group, or any number of other things. But you can note that it's always going to be the tab right before communications. So I'll select our continuing education module, and that's going to take me to the continuing education manager. Now, we're going to talk about this screen a little bit later, but first, let's talk about setting up those certificates and those points and credits. At the very top of my screen, next to this search panel, I'm going to select the configure button and certifications. Now, we've set up a handful of certifications and we've gotten a lot ready for today's webinar. So in the interest of time, we're going to look at how a few of these items have been set up, as opposed to me typing into a lot of different fields. So again, in the interest of time, we're going to fast forward through some of the things that we've set up already. Now, when you want to add a certification, you just select the Add Certification button. And what that's going to do is open up a blank window where you're entering in the name of the certificate that you're offering, the abbreviation. The abbreviation is going to be seen by users. The abbreviation can be something like a course code that you may have set up, whether or not that certification is active. So if it's active, it's going to be visible to any user who visits the user side of continuing education as something that they can select and sign up for. An inactive course does not show up. So if you offer certain courses at different times of year, perhaps a certification that you offer is something that you only give out from January to April, you can deactivate the course any other time of year. So it's only going to be available to your members and non-members when you want it to be available to them. Next up, how many points are required for someone to obtain that certificate? Now, we've used the term points here. That word is actually something that you can configure yourself. You can call that whatever you'd like. And we'll go over how to change that keyword that we're using. But for today, we're using the word points. You might be more familiar with the term credits. And again, you can change that if you'd like. And then how long is this certificate good for? How long does the user have that certificate once they've earned it until they need to renew their certificate? And that's going to be in a period of months, not days or not years. So if I take a look at some of the additional certificates that I've already created within the Northwest Suburb Chamber of Commerce, we have a few different certifications that can be earned. We have 2 certificates if you'd like to be a mentor. So these are just local businesses that have all come together to work together to make their community better. And we've given our members the option to mentor additional people, but we want them to be certified before they do that. We also offer some marketing and accounting courses. We can see here the abbreviation, the status of these all active, the points required to obtain their certificates, and how long they last. Now, I can go back and edit those items for each one of these certificates. And once I've created the certificate, that's when I get to move on to creating some other items for it. Now, the first would be the description of the course. The description is going to be public facing. So members and non-members will be able to see this option when they view the course. Now, the description is created using our advanced content editor. We have a lot of tutorials available on our YouTube channel on our content editor. So if you're not familiar with it, be sure to watch those tutorials. It's the same content editor that you're going to see in a lot of other spaces on your site when you're designing custom pages, when you're designing, formatted descriptions of events. So we've created a simple course description. It looks a little bit fancy. All I've done is just choose a few heading styles to separate out some of the information, and I added a nice photo. So we have our course description that we've created. And then last, we set up our fees for the course. So when you are setting up fees, you're adding any fee that you'd like. And these fees are going to be the same, they're going to be the same for all of your members. And you can set up a different set of fees for non-members. So we have a handful of fees here that we've already set up for our Women in Business Mentor certification. Now, when I add a fee, I'm being asked a handful of things. The name and the description of the fee, those are both going to be visible to users who are signing up for the course. These fees are required to be paid for that member in order to earn the certificate. So we have our name and description, whether or not that fee is active, and when do you show it and when do you require it? So if you've worked with additional charges for your members, you're familiar with some of these notations. Well, what this is asking is, when do these fees actually show up for the person registering for this certificate? When it's a new application, when the person is getting ready to renew, or both? And when is it required? For new applications, for renewals, or both? And who are we showing it for? Members, non-members, or both? And then we have the notations of the initial fee and the renewal fee. Now, let's say that, for example, we're taking a look at the fees for some of our books that we're offering, these e-textbooks. If I take a look at one of my textbooks that I'm offering through this course, I can see that I'm showing it for both new applications and renewals. I'm showing it for both members and non-members, and I'm requiring it for a new application. I'm not necessarily requiring it for members who are renewing. And you can do the same with our course fee and our renewal fee. So you can see here that our course fee, which is only for a new application, only shows up when it's a new application. The renewal fee only shows up when the member is getting ready to renew. The last options that you'll see with every fee, no matter how it's configured, would be, is this a variable fee? Does that fee change? And is there a late fee that applies? So the late fee is something that you'll configure within your default options, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And late fees would come into play if you're setting up your courses and certificates on a set schedule. And we'll talk about late fees a little bit later in our session today. And then last, the financial account that you'd like these fees to go to. A default financial account would be Master Education. You can, of course, create your own financial account to pair with each of these fees. And if you are interested in learning more about financial accounts, we have several tutorials and webinar videos that go over how to use financial accounts. So in this case, we have a handful of different fees that we've configured. In order to become a mentor, we want to just run a consumer report on your business. So we're going to ask for the member to pay for that. We're also asking that members are part of a mentorship committee. So we've asked for committee dues as part of this process. We asked them to purchase a couple of e-textbooks, there's a course fee, and then separately, there's a renewal fee if they choose to renew their certification as a mentor. Now, once each of these fees is set, we'll go right back in and we're essentially done. We do have reports that we can run for each individual course. Those reports are going to show us all of the applicants with that particular certification, and you're going to see the report icon in a lot of other spaces within the module. So there are a lot of reports that you're able to run within continuing education. Now, let's briefly take a look at what these look like from a member's perspective. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it. We're just going to take a little peek at continuing education from the member's perspective so we can see how some of these courses are appearing for those members. So we have our photo, we have all of our information for the course, we have the ability to apply to the course, and this is the same for each of the courses that we've set up. So I'm going to go right back into continuing education. I'm going to take a shortcut. Instead of going back into the control panel, I'm going to hover over this flyout menu on the right-hand side and select the edit icon. And that's going to quickly take me right back into the continuing education manager. Now, we were just looking at configuring certifications. Next up, let's configure our point system. And the first thing that we'll do, it's ClubExpress. You know we love our categories. We are going to set up point type categories. These are administrative only categories. The categories are not seen by users who are applying for the certificate. They're just a way for you to organize all of the different point types that you have. Users will instead see the specific point types, and we'll take a look at both of those so that you can see the difference. Within my point type categories, I have education and work experience. I have committee attendance. I have point types for assessments, presentations, webinars, and pre-approved courses. Now, let's go ahead and add a category. Within the category, we have the name and description. Again, these are for admin purposes only, whether or not that category is active. If you deactivate a category, every single point type within that category is deactivated. So the member won't be able to select it when they're requesting credit for something that they've done within that category. And what's the maximum number of points that anyone can obtain from any one category? So, for example, if you wanted to put a cap on the number of points that a member is able to obtain from visiting webinars, you would have the ability to do that. So once we've set up our categories, that's when we set up the individual point types. And this is really the meat and potatoes of your point system. Now, when I'm looking at my point type administration screen, I'm seeing all of the individual items that someone can request credit for, as well as its category. So you'll see that under work experience, I've included tiers of work experience that someone can request credit for. And you'll see that I have increased the number of credits that someone can have based on their work experience. The same with education. For committee attendance, we're asking that members of the mentorship committee attend at least 9 committee meetings in order to maintain good standing. So we also give extra points if you attend all of your committee meetings. We have points awarded for passing assessments, board presentations, webinars, and then we also offer points for pre-approved courses. And we're going to talk about pre-approved courses in just a moment. So on the grid here, you'll see the default number of points that someone is awarded for that specific item. You have the ability to adjust the points that you're offering on a case-by-case basis when you review and approve the points. So members can request points for things, but you have the ability to approve or decline it. You also have the ability to give the member the option to request points on their own without a default in place. And we'll talk about that a little bit later today. So let's take a look at what it looks like to add a point type. So when you're adding a point type, you're entering in the name and a preamble. This preamble is going to display to your users. So if there are any additional instructions that you want to offer with that point type, this is your space to do it. So for example, if I am asking someone to upload a certificate from a course that they've taken at a local university, I might include in the preamble, please make sure that you upload your certificate because your points are going to get declined if you don't. Underneath that, we select our category. So these categories are going to be the categories that we've just created. It just helps us as admins categorize our point types. Next up, whether or not that specific point type is activated. And if we are allowing pre-approved courses to be part of this point type. Now, I'm going to talk about pre-approved courses in just a little bit, so we are going to skip over that right now. And next up are prompts. So these prompts are going to be headings or questions that you can ask with the point type. And it includes a 200-character text field for the user to answer. So let's take a look at one of the point types that I've created, the bachelor's degree point type. If I take a look at how I've set that up, I have my bachelor's degree at the top, it's categorized in education, and my prompts are university, major, and minor. So those are just going to be prompts that the user sees with open text boxes underneath that ask them to fill in where they got their degree from, what their major and what their minor were. Underneath that, the default number of points that's awarded. Now, you can make this visible to members or not. Showing the start date and finish date. Opting to show a start and finish date, as you'll see when we take a look at what this looks like from a member's perspective, will open up fields where the member can select when they started and when they finished. Next up, showing the hours. So this opens up a field for the user to include a number of hours. Now, it may not necessarily apply to a degree, but if you are asking for points awarded for a presentation, you might ask the member to input the number of hours that they spent on it. And show points requested. So we have a default number of points, but you can also give the member the option to change that number of points that they're requesting. So they can request more points if they feel that they may have done more work that should be awarded more points. We've kept those selected as no for now. Now, let's just briefly talk about our pre-approved course option. This is going to be the only option that we have actually enabled our pre-approved courses in. So in our instructions, we've told our members that they can choose this option if they've taken a pre-approved course in lieu of a test through the Chamber of Commerce. So remember that pre-approved courses are those that might be offered by another organization that your users can take. So we're going to come back to this in just a second here, but let's review what we've done so far. So we have gone into our configure options and we've configured our certificates, our point type categories, and our point types. So those are some of the major things that are going to allow your members to sign up for those courses, and they're going to allow your members to actually start requesting credit for those courses, for those certificates that they want to earn from you. Now, let's move on to some of the other things that we're going to talk about. Let's demonstrate setting up our descriptions and our policies, and then we're going to dive right into those pre-approved courses. So right back on our demo chamber, we have 3 different descriptions and policies that we can set up. Our program description is what displays for our members when they visit the continuing education landing page. So our program description just includes some basic info about the courses. It also includes an important note. Because remember that continuing education pairs with our event calendar. So we've included some events that are required for our course takers on the event calendar. And I've created a link that not only takes me to my event calendar. Oh, well, it should take me to my event calendar. I probably messed that up. That's my own error. It takes you to the event calendar to show you all of the events that are eligible for credits and eligible for points. And then next up, we have just a quick widget that shows the upcoming events for individual courses. Now, if I go back into continuing education and I take a look at that program description, It's just being created within my advanced content editor again. So if you're not familiar with this particular feature, just be sure to check those tutorial videos that we have on our YouTube channel. Next up, configuring the program policy. So if you have configured a policy for your storefront or for your blogs or forums, you're familiar with our program policy, the user can click a policy button on the continuing education landing page in order to view the policy that you've set for your certificate program. And the last item that you can configure is our program affidavit. The affidavit is what the member or non-member must agree to in order to continue and apply for the course. It's the first screen that they're going to see when they select the apply button for any course that they've selected. So this is just our way of saying that the Northwest Chamber of Commerce is not an accredited university, and no one should try and take these certificates and transfer them to an actual university. Now let's dive into pre-approved courses. So pre-approved courses are a great way to allow users to take courses at another organization or another college or university in lieu of taking a course through your organization. You have the ability to set up those courses and to let users know which courses you accept. And you also have the ability to still approve and review those courses. So as part of asking someone, did you take this course? You can also ask them to provide you a copy of a transcript or a certificate that they may have gotten for the course. You can also use pre-approved courses as your only means of collecting and issuing certificates. So instead of creating a lot of different ways that users can use points to accumulate and earn a certificate, you can just say, if you take these pre-approved courses at this organization or at this local university, you basically have earned your certificate through your organization. So there are a lot of ways that you can use it. You don't even have to use pre-approved courses. When we go over our defaults and our options, you'll see that you have the ability to actually turn those off. But let's talk about setting up those pre-approved courses. So under my configure options, you've of course seen that we can configure our pre-approved courses. So if I select this, I'm on my approved course administration screen. Now you'll see in my grid listing my courses that I have the option to delete one of them and not the others. Once you configure your pre-approved courses, if you decide that you want to delete one, you don't have that ability if someone has used that course in a point request. So if a member has stated that they've taken the course and they wanted to request credit for it, you no longer have the option to delete the course, but you do have the option to deactivate it. So let's take a look at adding a course. We're entering in the course name and the description. How many points are awarded for that specific course? So when we were looking at our point type, we had the ability to determine which point types we're going to give which number of credits. In this case, each individual course can carry its own set of credits. The provider offering the pre-approved course, the location, when that course starts, and whether or not that course is active. An inactive course will not be available for members or non-members to select to receive point credit. Now, keep in mind that we're looking at this from the administrative perspective. So in next week's webinar, when we talk about the member and user side, you'll see how our user is going to be able to select these pre-approved courses and state that they have taken them. So let's take a look at one of the courses that we've set up. We have Principles of Marketing. So we have our name of the course, the description of the course. I've just included the course short name, how many points are awarded for the course, who's providing it, where they are, and if the course has a start date. So at a normal university, their courses are usually going to start in January or in August, but maybe it's an online course that you can sign up for anytime. Now, with each of these courses, they're not always going to display for your users, which is why back in our continuing education manager screen, we're going to take one quick look at that point type that we created for pre-approved courses. So at the very bottom here, we've created a specific point type and category just for pre-approved courses. Now, I can separate these courses out. So some of those courses were for accounting, some of those courses were for marketing. I can say that I have a category of pre-approved courses, and I have a point type for marketing courses and a point type for accounting courses. I've just lumped them all together, but of course, you can do whatever suits your organization best. And if I take a look at how I've set that up, I've enabled pre-approved courses for this point type. So that means that when a user selects pre-approved courses as their point type, that they're going to see a drop-down list of each one of the pre-approved courses that I have selected to be available to my members. Now, in addition to the member being able to go in and see the list of courses that they can request credit for, I've also created a custom page for pre-approved courses. And this is just under my career submenu where we can access continuing education, our jobs board, which is another extra cost feature, and our pre-approved course list. And I've just created a really simple custom page that outlines the pre-approved courses, lets people know that if you're trying to get an accounting certificate, please don't take a marketing course, and vice versa. So again, when you're setting up your pre-approved courses, you're setting up courses that someone can take at a related organization that they can still use as the basis for credit or points with your organization. Now, next, let's talk about those setup options and those default options. So these are going to make a little more sense now that you've seen some of the items within continuing education, and we're just navigating right back to continuing education within the control panel. And we'll select configure and our last option, options. So at the very top of continuing education options, we can see where we can set that keyword. So I mentioned at the top of our presentation today that you have the ability to set the keyword being used to describe your credits or your points. This is where you would do that. Active months, the number of months that points are actually counted. So we're saying that your points are only going to be good for 3 years. So if you published an article 5 years ago, we're sorry, but we're just not going to count that. We want something that's a little more recent and a little more relevant. And you can change that. And renewal days. So when you set up each of your certificates, you noted when that certificate expires in months. This lets the user know 60 days in advance that their certificate's going to expire. They'll see the option to renew their certificate within their list of certificates through their member profile. And they'll also get a reminder email letting them know that their certificate is close to expiring. You can choose to hide the expiration date of points from your members. And when your members are accessing their continuing education history and details through their member profile, they'll see when their points are actually expiring. So they'll be able to see when something might be falling off of their radar, when they're not going to be able to use that to count towards a certificate any longer. We can also enter in administrative notes. So we're going to go through approving credits and certificates in just a moment. When you do that, you as an administrator have the option to enter in notes. Now, these could be notes as to why you might be declining to approve a certificate or a set of points. They could be notes for really any reason. And it's just a matter of whether or not you want to show those notes to the user or whether you want to keep them for admin eyes only. Next up, the mailing list category used for applicants. So this is going to apply for anyone who applies for a course. You can call them the default, which is an ad hoc form user. You can, of course, create your own mailing list category. And again, it will apply to everyone who signs up for a certificate through your organization. We have tutorials and webinars covering mailing list categories. If you're not familiar with them, I highly recommend taking a look at them, especially if you're considering beefing up how you communicate with your members. Be sure to catch those tutorials and webinars. When we set up our courses or our certificates, we also had the option to say that a late fee applied to any one of the fees that we configured. And you'll recall that it was simply an option as to whether or not the late fee applied. because in our default options, that's where we configure the actual late fee. It's separate for members and non-members. Whether or not you allow certificates to be extended. So when we take a look at approving and reviewing certificates, we'll talk about this option. Right now, we have not allowed certificates to be extended. I'll go ahead and check that option, and I will say that certificates can be extended for 15 days. And we'll take a look at what that looks like from an admin's perspective. Next up, if you're allowing credits to be rolled over. So we had mentioned that at the very top of this screen, your credits or points, are only going to be available to use for 36 months or 3 years. So we allow you to allow your members to roll over their credits. Now, you might do this for a couple of different reasons. Perhaps within your specific field, information or knowledge doesn't change very often. So if someone published an article maybe 5 years ago, that information might still be relevant. So you might allow administrators to roll over credits a specific number of months. And I'll go ahead and select that option. And I will say that they can roll it over for 10 months. That means that if someone's credit is getting close to expiring, I can just renew it a few times or roll it over a few times in order for them to be able to use that credit again. And again, you can use this to roll over credits from anything. You can roll over credits from an article that someone may have published. Maybe they won a Nobel Prize and you think that they should always receive credit for that, or a gold medal in the Olympics, any reason at all. Whether or not you want to enable pre-approved courses. So you can turn that feature off entirely. If you only want users to be able to access items that are given by your organization, you can turn off pre-approved courses and you don't even have to worry about setting those up. Whether or not you want to show certifications on the member bio screen, and certification before profile access. So we're currently experiencing a little bit of an issue with the profile access. However, it's been submitted to our developers for them to go ahead and fix that. But it just determines whether or not continuing education is going to appear for the member before they have sufficient credit to earn their certificate. So remember that your members are going to apply for the certificate and then earn the credits in order to obtain that certificate. But you can do it in the reverse. So you can say that you don't want members to be able to access continuing education before they've earned their certificate. And you, as an administrator, can apply points to that member's profile in order for them to earn that certificate. And again, we're going to go over a little bit of this, but a lot of that member side is going to be discussed in next week's webinar. Next up, the next certificate number. So each certificate gets its own number and it's automatically assigned. You can also change that certificate number on the fly as an administrator. Whether or not the member or non-member needs a certain number of points in order to renew their certificate. So this just says that you are or are not allowing someone to renew their certificate, whether or not they have the sufficient number of points. And applicable event categories. So we've talked about that connection that can happen between your event calendar and continuing education, allowing members to sign up for an event and automatically getting credit for that event. So this is just where you select which categories within your events module that actually apply to this particular feature. And how long ago can the events have been held before a member stops receiving credit for those? So we've said that it's good for a year. Anything past a year, we definitely want you to continue going to events. So we want that cutoff to be at 1 year. The default financial account being used for all of the fees and the contact person. Their contact information will be included on emails that are being sent to continuing education applicants. So next up, let's start talking about those events and events that you can use for credit. So we've looked at the continuing education options. We've seen the categories that we can select for events, and we've also seen how far back we can count those events for credit. So let's take a look at actually adding those events to the calendar and what that option looks like for you. When I visit my event calendar, I have a handful of things on my event calendar so far. And if I take a look at my legend at the top right-hand corner, I can see that my yellow items are my continuing education webinars. So I'm going to, again, go right back into my event calendar, and I'm going to add an event. Now, we're not going to go through the whole song and dance of adding an event. I'm simply going to call this a mentorship meeting. And I'm only going to touch on the items that are relevant to continuing education. So I'm going to skip over a lot of this. I'm going to select my continuing education webinar item. That's one of the categories that I have opted to include in continuing education. I'll go ahead and select a date for this. I'm going to leave everything else as is, and I'm going to uncheck a lot of these options, but I'm going to keep a couple of them. I'll go ahead and say that the panel is complete, save my changes. Now, the only page where you would really need to focus on continuing education would be registration fees and attendance tracking. So this is where you're going to say that this event counts for continuing education credit and categorize it. At the very top, I'd say that registration is required. We want users to register. Otherwise, we don't have the ability to mark them as having attended very easily. You can always add registrants after the fact, but why not just put a little bit of that onus on the user? They have to register for the event in advance in order to be marked as having attended and receive credit. So at the very bottom, under my attendance option, I would select that I want to track attendance and that this event is eligible for continuing education credit. Then I would select my point type, and I'm going to classify this as a webinar. With my webinar, because I've configured that point type, it automatically adjusts the number of credits that are given for this specific item. Now, you might have several different types of events that each might have or carry their own point credit. So I just have one. You can create as many as you'd like. I'll go ahead and say that the panel is complete and save my changes. Now, let's take a look at my event calendar, and I'll go ahead and select the webinar that is occurring today on our fake demo chamber. So if I select this and I'm looking at it as an administrator, but remember that a lot of this you're also going to be able to see as a user. So when a user visits an event that they think might be eligible for credit, it states right at the bottom that the event is eligible for 5 education credits. So they know this before they even register for this particular item. Now, we'll briefly go over marking attendance for a webinar or for an event within your event calendar. And for that, I'm going to go right back into my event calendar and visit another event that I know that we have a couple of registrants for, which is our accounting introduction that happened a couple of days ago. Now, as an administrator, I go into my edit options for the event, and I'm visiting the admin toolbox. So the second icon from the left is going to be your attendance icon. It looks like a group of people. We've configured the event to allow us to mark people as having attended. And once I do that, that's what actually kicks that credit back to the member or the non-member. So once I mark a member as having attended, it automatically issues them that 5-point credit for that particular event. The member doesn't have to do anything more to receive credit for that. And you as an admin are done. So next up, let's talk about assessments. So if you want to create course assessments or tests within your website, you have the ability to do that using Ad Hoc Forms. Now, you'll recall that when we set up some of our courses, we included an assessment fee. So you can use that fee portion to cover the assessment fee, or you can add the fee to your Ad Hoc form. So let's take a little look at one of the forms that we have set up. I'm going to go into the control panel. Ad Hoc Forms is included in the Communications tab. Now, if you haven't used Ad Hoc Forms before, you might need to enable it using the Configure option. Visit our tutorial on using the control panel, which is on our YouTube channel, in order to see how you might activate a module that you've never used before. But Ad Hoc Forms is a module that is included on your website. It's not an extra cost feature. So I'll go ahead and select Ad Hoc Forms. And I won't go through entirely creating a form. We have tutorials and videos available that show us how to do that. So I'm just going to talk briefly about some of the options that I've included here. I've titled the form. I've categorized it. So I created an entire category just for assessments. The form is active, which means that members and non-members are able to take it once they have a link. It's available to members only, but you can change that, of course, if you're offering your courses to non-members as well. The financial account associated with the form, and the fee. So this is where I would decide, maybe I want my course takers to pay for the assessment when they take it, as opposed to paying for it ahead of time. And then, of course, the mailing list category, when to close out the form. I've left the close method to manual because I want the form to stay open. And whether or not I'm including any attachments that I'm sending as an administrator, or an attachment that the user might be including with their form, the contact person for the form, and whether or not to notify that contact person when that form has been completed. And again, this is how you might set up an assessment or a test, or even a way for members and non-members to submit documentation that might be relevant for them completing the course, whether it might be a report or anything like that. Next up, certificate administration. So understanding some of the statuses that you might see. Now, when we visit continuing education and we are in the continuing education manager, and I will just quickly go back to that so that we can see what that looks like. When you're taking a look at anyone who has requested a certificate, you also see their status. Now, these statuses are relatively new. Most of them are pending, and we're going to see a couple of status changes in just a moment. But you're going to see several different statuses. So the applied status means that the user signed up but hasn't paid. And that's the initial status that you'll see as soon as they click that apply button if they have not paid yet. Once they pay for the certificate, their certificate status is set to pending. And that means that they've applied, they've paid, but they haven't accumulated enough of the credits to hold that certificate. Once they do, the certificate becomes active. Now, the notations that I made about payment as it relates to applied versus pending apply to each of these statuses as well. So when a certificate is active, if they've applied for renewal before their certificate expires, it'll say renewal applied. Once they pay for it, it'll say renewal pending. And then once they have earned the credits, or once you've approved their renewal, they'll have an active certificate again. If their certificate expires without them having renewed it preemptively, it'll change to expired renewal pending. And last, the option that you'd see would be canceled or declined. So once you have the option to approve a course or to decline a course, their status would change to canceled or declined. So all of those statuses are things that you might see when you're visiting continuing education from an administrative perspective. Now, let's take a look at the last item in our presentation today, which is going to be all of our approvals. How does an administrator actually approve these certificates and these points? So for that, I'm going to switch back to our demo chamber. And underneath approvals, we have the option to approve certifications and points. So first, you would likely start by approving points that members and non-members have requested. So at the very top here, we have the date the point request was submitted and the date that the points would expire. And this is based on the expiration months that we've selected in our options. The name of the person submitting, the type of point, the description, and the points that were requested. So this happens to be someone who has taken a pre-approved course and would like credit for that course. I can take a look at the edit options to see all of the details for that particular course. These are things that were entered by Colleen. I can add those admin notes. Remember that we have the ability to keep those to ourselves or to share those with the member. And the points that are approved. I can change this point value or I can approve it as is. So I'm going to go ahead and approve these points. And now those points are completely gone. They've been approved, and Colleen now has those ready to go in her profile. Now, if I go back into the Continuing Education Manager, I'm not only approving points that members have submitted to me, I'm also approving their certificates once they have sufficient points to earn them. So right now, these are all of those certificates that are pending. Not every member is going to have the points sufficient to obtain it, but it looks like Henry does. So Henry applied for a small to mid-sized business accounting certificate, and he has sufficient points. So a couple of things that I can do here. I can simply select this and go ahead and approve those items, or I can select the edit option. And I have the ability to change some basic information, such as the grant date, when this was approved, when they sign the affidavit. I can include a different certificate number. Again, I can add in notes, and I can also suppress confirmation emails that the member might receive as it relates to this particular certificate. Now, if you want to approve the certificate with changes, you'll need to visit this screen by selecting that edit icon and then select approve. If I want to approve the certificate as is using all of my default options, I simply select the certificate and approve the checked items. I get my approval date. I'll go ahead and select save. And now I have that certificate ready to go. Henry has that listed on his profile. I can also filter out each of these statuses to view different sets of approvals that I have to go through as an administrator. So now if we go back into our Continuing Education Manager, we can see that Henry is the only member who has an active certificate. I can see when he applied, when the certificate was granted, and when it expires. Once he starts renewing those certificates, we'll see the most recent renewal date available on this particular screen. Devin, how are we doing on questions?
There are a few. We've had someone, I was just typing up a response, but if you could give us a bit of a description of the difference between e-learning and continuing education is something that has been asked about.
Great question. So the difference between the two, and if you are interested, we do have a webinar on e-learning, so be sure to check that out. The difference between the two is mainly in how the module functions. So we've gone over continuing education. With e-learning, what you're doing is creating a course that is really just available through your site. It also issues a certificate, but those courses are going to be based on videos. So with e-learning, you are setting up video-based courses where the user has to watch a series of videos that you embed on your site. And it's also based on assessments that you might create. So you might set up a course where a student would have to watch 5 videos and take a test after the 3rd and 5th videos. So that's a way to set up almost a learning management system within your site. Again, it's video based. You use Ad Hoc Forms to create the assessment as well. So it uses some of the same functionality, but there isn't a point system that goes with it. It does not pair with events with your event calendar. It is a module that functions just within itself where you can add videos to create a course.
And we also had someone ask, can a credit or certificate, either the points or the certificate itself, be set to never expire?
So I believe that there is a limit. There might be an upper limit. I apologize that I don't know the exact upper limit, but I believe there is one. And the way that you would get around that would be just allowing those rollovers to happen. So if we go right back into our options, so we can say that, points are good for a maximum of maybe 600 months. And then at the very bottom, you have the ability to allow rollovers. So that would be a way that you could push out those points that you don't want to have expired.
And then we've also had a few people ask about the process and pricing for downloadable or printable certificates. I know that the pricing is kind of on a case-by-case basis, depending on how many certificates and the complexity of the certificates is. So it's something you have to talk to support about to get a quote on. So I don't think we have a hard price for that. But do you know anything about the process of getting that started, Sam?
Yes, so you are absolutely correct. There isn't a hard price, it's a case by case basis. And once you activate continuing education and you have your courses set up, you can give our support team a call and they will connect you with one of our designers who would be able to let you know based on what you might want. How much design time it might entail. You might opt to only have certificates for some of your courses instead of all of them. And of course, depending on the complexity of the certificates that you might design, that will affect how long the designer spends on creating those certificates for you.
And I think that's all I had in terms of audience questions.
All right. Well, we are right on time today. Well, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to attend our session. Again, don't forget that next week, Devin, who you've heard today, and he's been answering your questions, he's going to be hosting our session on continuing education for members. So be sure to take a look at that so you can see how all of the things that we've set up on the admin side are being used on the member side. We're going to use our same demo chamber to demonstrate this. And I want to thank you, of course, for your patience for my technical glitch. We really appreciate it. And that's all I have for you folks. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you in the next webinar. Bye, everyone.